And let's kick things off with Jason Aaron talking about his career and learn a little bit about what's coming up with Ninja Turtles, which I think anybody that's watching this show knows I'm a big fan. Let's do it. All right, folks. Today I have another special interview. Pretty prominent writer and one who's been in the news lately because he is about to take over Ninja Turtles for its 40th anniversary, and we'll be getting to that. But today we have the lovely Mr. Jason Aaron. Jason, thank you for giving us some of your time today. Appreciate
Sure.
that.
It's great. I don't get called lovely very often. I appreciate it.
I'll keep that in my back pocket if it tickles you. Let's see. I wanted to just sort of start with something a little more broad than just a specific comic you worked on. I was curious because you've now worked in comics for a good amount of time, more
Right?
than a couple decades at this point, or coming up on it. Right, we're right about 20 years now.
Yeah.
And
Well, I won a Marvel Comics Talent Search contest in 2020 or in 2001. Right?
yeah,
I
yeah.
think that's right.
And then I
Yeah.
started remembering seeing some of your stuff in like 2006 and 7 at like Vertigo and stuff like that.
Right.
Or thereabouts. I could be a
Yeah.
little off on the number,
I think
but
that's right.
so you've had some time in comics, and I'm curious. Aside from the stories that you've created, is there anything that being in this world of comics has sort of given you that's memorable at this point? Whether that's like a trip or a friendship, or I don't know, just learning about something that you had to study for a storyline. Is there anything that stands out?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that before. I mean, I think, yeah. I mean, lots of things. I think my life has changed in all sorts of ways over the course of those 20 or so years. Definitely lots of trips. I mean, I'd never been other than walking into Tijuana one time when I was 18 years old. I had never been out of the country until comics, until I
Yeah,
started traveling to do shows, and now I've kind of been all over the place. So it affords me the luxury of being able to travel while ignorant, and that I just fly to places, and there's somebody there to meet me at the airport and take me to wherever I'm staying and tell me like this is what the money is called, so I can fly and still be an ignorant American. So the lots of travel, I think it's changed my diet, and then it's expanded my food palette. I grew up in the South in a small town, and I think it's kind of just fried chicken and collard greens, which I still love, but
yeah,
um, being able to you know um, develop friendships with people literally all over the planet.
that's nice.
I think those are the two things that jump to mind: just traveling and eating, eating well.
That's great. I love it. I wanted to thank you for something very specific. Um, this goes back quite a ways, but shortly after you finished Scalped, I just happened to be really sick. I think it must have been the flu. It's hard to remember, but I was definitely like bedridden for just like 2 or 3 days. And I had a trade paperback of the first volume of Scalped, and I read it and I loved it, and I just couldn't get out of bed. And I got it all digitally. I just binged your series while I was just like sick in bed. Loved that one. Any plans for more crime fiction anytime in the future? Because I also will say Southern Bastards was like, something I really enjoyed while it was coming out. I like your crime fiction. Any thoughts to getting in that, dipping in that pool again?
Yes, not immediate plans. Like not this year. I've got a new creator-owned book I've been working on that I don't know. There's not really much I can say about it in terms of genre. But yeah, I'd certainly I love crime fiction, love crime comics. I mean, I pretty much read a lot of those. I think I've always leaned in that direction. It's not a coincidence that Scalped was kind of my first big ongoing book, and that I've kind of gone back to that a few times. Men of Wrath was another Southern crime book I did with Ron
Yeah,
Carney. So I think the yes, for sure. I just can't tell you exactly what that will be yet.
that's fair. That's fair. I'm just poking and prodding, seeing what I'll get out of this. But this next question I have just requires me to lay a small amount of groundwork for the viewer. But a book, a relatively early book you did that I also really enjoyed was The Other Side, which, for those who may not have read it yet, fantastic Vietnam War story told from multiple perspectives. But what I'm curious about was whether you had any trepidation about covering that, because my understanding is your cousin was Gustav Hosford, who very famous for The Short Timers, which was adapted into the Kubrick film Full Metal Jacket. I mean, that's a lot to potentially live up to in covering the Vietnam
Right.
conflict. Was there any trepidation there, or was that more just like, a happy coincidence, or what? Like,
No, no trepidation. I mean, I think it's definitely
interesting.
that connection that that encouraged me to do it in the first place. I mean,
Okay.
Gus, yeah, Gus was my cousin. I met him just a couple times over the course of my life. I was, he was a big influence, and then he was the first person I'd ever met who made his living as a writer. Certainly, first person I met who came from sort of my neck of the woods.
Right.
And then he died in '93. And at some point, I spent a lot of time just kind of researching his life. His books were out of print, and just gathered kind of everything I could find about him, and started created a website devoted to him. Met a lot of people through that, and some of the people I met were his group of Marine combat correspondents from like '68, '69.
Oh, I
Still,
wasn't familiar
still
with
a
that.
very
Okay.
tight knit group of people, including one of them is Del Dye, who some people may know as for so many years he was kind of the preeminent Hollywood technical advisor, and you'd recognize him from movies he's been in like Platoon and Saving Private Ryan. He was the guy putting everybody through boot camp,
Wow.
and making sure all the technical details were right. So a guy who's really, made his living as sort of being expert
Mhm.
on all this kind of stuff. So I got to go to some of the reunions for these guys. I got to be there one time in,
Oh,
DC at the Wall, and really just sort of hang out and be a fly on the wall and listen to their stories, and sometimes funny stories, sometimes not so funny. So it was really through my my connection with Gus, and the time I spent sort of obsessively researching him, and then hanging out with all those guys, and they were all so kind and gracious. Through that inspired me to do The Other Side.
hmm,
And so then, I mean, and they kind of adopted me as like a, um, I don't know what, like just my connection with Gus, got me through the door, and they were all incredibly gracious to me. So I could email Del Dye and ask him questions. Again, a guy who's getting paid by Steven Spielberg, and
yeah.
Oliver Stone to be technical advisor on some of the biggest movies in Hollywood, and I could email him and say, "Hey, what about this? What about that?"
Huh.
And those guys, they would read my scripts and read the book, and so I knew, like, I was really writing for them. I mean, I'm always on the one hand writing for
Yeah.
myself and wanted to do a story I thought was cool, but I wanted to do right by Gus and to do right by those guys, because I knew they'd also tell me, they would have no problems telling me to my face, like, "Oh, you screwed this up," So I didn't want to disappoint them or do something that they would be unhappy with. So there's really that relationship that, again, like, made me excited and encouraged to do that. So I never felt trepidation, about diving into that.
That's actually, like, just kind of beautiful. It feels more like a legacy or something that was formed there instead. I thank you for sharing. I appreciate
Yeah, and
that.
the book is dedicated to Gus and to those guys, the Snuffies, they call themselves. They
Okay.
still, when they go to reunions, they'll bring Gus along with them, and they've got some of his ashes,
Wow. That's
which
amazing.
I've got. Like, they gave me a little piece of them too. They're sitting over on my bookshelf.
That's really beautiful. That's really beautiful. Um, it's not setting me up for great segues into fun, wild superhero stuff, but I work myself into that corner. I've got no one to blame but myself. I also want to say, Batman Offworld, I'm really enjoying. I've always been a
Thanks.
big fan of Doug Mahnke, and and the story really seems to play to a lot of his strengths. He's always been good at like beefy guys and monsters and stuff like that. Um, yeah, was it always the plan to work with Doug, or had you had this story before and it made sense to pair with him?
Yeah, it
Just
was. I
curious
mean,
how that
that
developed.
was always my plan to work with Doug on that. I mean, I kind of knew once I knew my was kind of coming out from under my Marvel deal, and I wasn't looking to renew and wanted to be a free agent. I knew I wanted to
Yeah,
do some DC stuff. I knew I wanted that first thing to be Batman. Then pretty quickly settled on. I kind of had two ideas. The other one I still like to get to someday. It's a very very different kind of Batman story, but I knew I wanted this one to be my first thing, and that it's a different kind of Batman story, which
yeah,
I didn't want to do something that people would necessarily expect, and then it also felt like a way of paying respect and homage to some of the books from my childhood, the DC comics that I plucked off the spinner rack that made me, you know, that made me an addict, that made me a fan, um, that made me want to someday write comics. So, Tari Force, New Teen Titans, Omega Men,
totally,
um,
totally. Yeah, I get that
plus
sci-fi vibe.
right.
But
So I knew I wanted that to be my first DC book, and right away the first person I asked about was Doug, who I've wanted to work
okay,
with for years, but he's always been exclusive to DC. So
yeah.
thankfully, for the first time, when I threw his name out, the answer was like, "Yeah, I think he's available. I think we can get him."
Well, it's a great fit, but to like just give you some more props, I love a story where the hero is really on their back foot up against incredible odds. And, this takes just about everything that Batman sort of has in his toolkit, from his allies to his gadgets and everything, and just takes that all, strips it all away from him, and kind of shows us what it still takes to be a hero. So I'm really enjoying a lot about how you're getting to the core of a character there, through a very
Thanks.
different type of story, the sci-fi
Yeah, I
aspect of
mean, especially with Batman, I feel like it's hard to put him in a situation where, we have that feeling, right, where
it.
he's
Can
like
be.
in over his head. And then so being able to go back and show a guy who's still pretty young, still pretty new at the job, and I think by this point feels pretty confident in what he's doing in terms of the streets of
Mhm.
Gotham, right? Like
Right.
he's worked some of that out and he's gotten that somewhat under control and knows what he's doing. And then he's presented with a situation that is completely beyond anything he's ever trained for or experienced. And so to see him faced with those kind of challenges and work his way through it, and then also, you know, the story and the mission kind of changes at a point in sort of issue three, and it
Yes.
becomes about him really figuring out, not just can I beat these guys that I'm trying to beat, but what does it really mean to be Batman?
Mm, I know. I love it. I love it. Thank you for sharing that. Let's talk about Ninja Turtles. Kind of the main reason you're here is we've got this huge, and this makes me feel so old because I definitely grew up with some of the black and white comics, but it is the 40th anniversary of Ninja Turtles. Ninja Turtles is something that is surprisingly versatile, in my opinion, because it
Sure.
can be gritty crime stories. It can be big, bombastic sci fi. It can honestly have a lot of humor to it. Uh, anything you can tell us about which direction your run might focus? Like what kind of ideas you want to bring to it?
Yeah, I mean, like I've said, I feel like everything for me goes back to that original Mirage Studios book. That was what defined Turtles to me. I was
Mhm.
reading that before the cartoon, before any of the films, anything like that. So when I think Turtles, I really still think back to that book. And so I think we're in some sense, the storyline is called Return to New York, and that doesn't just mean, you know, not just about relocating geographically in some sense. It's about kind of returning to those roots and returning to this is more of a crime driven story, street level story.
Okay.
It still goes to, I think, some places we haven't seen before. It puts the turtles in some situations we haven't seen them face before, but is very much kind of returning to the grittiness and rawness of that original series.
I'm excited to hear that. You've got a murderer's row of talent lined up for the artists on this book. How long was something like this in the works? Like I feel like to coordinate all of this talent must have taken a while.
I mean, the art part of it really came together pretty quickly.
Okay.
You know, it's the surprisingly, you can get a bunch of people to commit to, an issue or shorter runs than you can necessarily to sign up for an extended run. So I had the framework of like, this is what my idea is. This is how many issues we're talking about. And yeah, we were able to line up that murderous row, which I knew, like, was in my outline from the beginning of those first four issues of the book. Would each one would focus on a different turtle.
And that
Um,
also kind of goes back to the Mirage Studios, because that was something obviously that Eastman and Laird did very early on. Started giving
right.
us one shots to fill in the backgrounds of the personalities and of each of these turtles. So
Right,
that's kind of
which
cool.
is the kind of thing I've done multiple times over the years, going back to Scalped, like the second arc of Scalped had issues that focus on the different characters. Because I'm definitely a guy who's more, as a writer, kind of more character driven than I am necessarily plot driven.
Mm,
So the plot of this is it's not something where we're trying to reinvent the wheel plot wise. Um, and so I like the idea of one leading with the those kind of one shots focusing on the guys just to see where they are, establish like what they've been up to in the time gap since the previous volume ended, how they've kind of gone their separate ways, and literally and figuratively. Um, and then before we kind of bring them back together and see how those pieces fit together. So yeah, it's great to be able to bring. We got Joel Jones doing issue 1, and Raphael Albuquerque on 2, Cliff Chang on 3, Chris Burnham on 4, and then
wow.
Chris is also drawing the preview story in the Alpha issue, which comes out the month before. So it's a pretty incredible lineup, right out of the gate. And
Yeah.
I think those are four very different artists too. So it kind of helps emphasize. Like for me, this is sort of a point in time where the brothers have been through a lot, right? A lot over the
Right.
last 150 issues, and they kind of reach that point where they take a beat, and maybe it feels like they're drifting apart or growing apart. They're still teens, but they're definitely in their later teens. Where I
Okay.
think all of us at that point in our lives, you're still, despite whatever you've been through, you still maybe feel like you don't know exactly who you are, right? You're still figuring yourself out, and life may take you in a direction you wouldn't have expected a few years before. So I think you've got four brothers kind of all looking at their lives, maybe feeling a bit like that, feeling a bit distant from one another. And what does that mean for the Ninja Turtles going forward? How do they come back together? How do those pieces work? Like what is the key to them being able to be the combined force that they need to be in order to face the challenge that lies ahead?
I'm excited for it, sincerely. Fan of you, but also fan of the Ninja Turtles, fan of these artists. This is every once in a while as a comics reader, a bunch of things come together that like just sort of seem to line up, and you're like, this is for me. So definitely excited. Let me end things with super cliche question, but I'm just curious. I think a lot of us do have a favorite Ninja Turtle. Do you?
Right.
Or did you before you wrote anyway? Like now
Well,
you have to play favorites to all of them, but did you have a favorite?
right. No, I don't.
No?
I mean, if you had asked me a year ago, I probably could have given you an answer, but I'm definitely not going to now. But even then, I don't think I've never had like, oh, this guy's my favorite and screw all these other guys. Like I never felt like that.
Just curious
Um,
if I could pin you down. But you know what? There's also been
who's your favorite? Who's your
Donatello. I don't know
okay?
why. Just exactly. I just maybe it's just the sort of nerdy intelligence across, there's obviously been also a lot of different interpretations of the turtles,
Sure.
across comics, movies, cartoons. But for some reason I just gravitate towards Donatello. I have a really ridiculous collection of all the various versions of
Oh,
Donatello.
nice.
Yeah.
Most everybody who's interviewed me about the turtles has asked that same question,
I kind of
and I
figured,
think they've
but I'm just
all
curious.
I feel like you're the first Donatello that because I've gotten different answers with
I love him.
from everybody who's asked the question.
But you know what?
Um,
I that sort of does show like that people like really gravitate towards and relate to these characters if they can like even debate that question, like who's your
sure,
favorite? Because I don't feel like the same question gets asked as much about, say, the Avengers or something. Like, which is your favorite Avenger? I don't. It doesn't get
sure,
asked as much as Ninja Turtles. So
right,
there's a
yeah,
lot of love and passion there.
and certainly I think everybody who's reading the book should not want me to have a favorite, right? Like
Not at this
I am
point,
trying,
no.
and I have written I've written each one of the turtles by this point, and have been very excited about the beginning of this story of getting to write each of them in a different kind of story, different setting before we slam them all together. So I have approached each one of those issues with equal amounts of excitement and interest and investment, and hopefully that shows. So hopefully, whoever your favorite turtle is, you're able to pick this book up and feel like I agree with you. Feel like, yeah, that one's my favorite too.
I'm excited for it. Jason, I sincerely appreciate you giving us some time today. Best of luck with Ninja Turtles, and I speak for my viewers and stuff. We're excited to see what you have next. So thank you so much for taking some time out today.
No problem. Thank you.